Formula One world had a busy week between the rounds in Brazil and California, packing up and air freighting everything over and setting up again, fixing anything broken and poring over the circuit diagrams because the organisers had made some change to the layout of the Long Beach street circuit, with further modifications planned for 1983. Amid all this activity, on Thursday, Carlos Reutemann dropped a bombshell in a press conference. He was retiring from Formula One with immediate effect. He had at least told Frank Williams earlier, on the evening after the Brazilian race, giving him a bit of time to sort out a replacement. The following day, Britain woke to the news that Argentina had invaded the Falkland Islands. The pundits were quick to draw their own conclusions, but neither Carlos nor Frank Williams ever publicly commented on the reasons for the sudden retirement. Patrick Head later commented that his heart wasn't in it anymore, and it was noticeable that he'd been rather eclipsed by Keke Rosberg so far this season. So Frank Williams picked up the phone and called Alan Jones. No dice, he was definitely retired. Instead, Frank called Mario Andretti, who had nothing else to do, and accepted. He was driving for the Patrick Racing team in IndyCar, and couldn't commit to the rest of the season, but there was no clash with the Long Beach race, and he knew the circuit. There were no other changes to cars, with the atmospheric team still using their water bottle wheels, now interestingly joined by Renault. Ferrari responded by fitting a bizarre rear wing to their cars during qualifying. The rules stated that the rear wing could have up to 2 elements, each up to 110 centimetres wide. The smirking Ferrari mechanics had mounted 2 side by side on a central pillar to give a single double-width wing. Within the latter, but clearly not the spirit of the rule, the message was pretty clear. Once again, a small pre-qualifying shootout eliminated one car, in this case Derek Warwick, who was troubled by a persistent misfire in his Hart engine and never really got a proper flying lap in, before the main qualifying sessions began on Friday and Saturday. The Michelin runners, McLaren, Renault, Alfa Romeo, Ligier, seemed to be having a better time of it, though Prost spent most of Friday down in a baffled 26th place before the Michelin boys noticed he was on the wrong tyres and replaced them just in time for him to get a flying lap in and go up the order. As the drivers got used to the new layout, most significantly improved their times on Saturday, and Niki Lauda topped the time for most of the day, until, in the dying seconds, Andrea de Cesaris threw his Alfa Romeo around the track 0.818 seconds quicker and took his first career pole. At 22, he was the youngest pole sitter ever. The Renaults came next, with Giacomelli's Alfa 5th and Piquet 6th. Villeneuve in the oddly winged Ferrari was 7th, Rosberg 8th, after burning out his clutch recovering from a spin, with Pironi and a very impressive Jarier making up the top 10. The returning Andretti, perhaps understandably, couldn't get higher than 13th, alongside his compatriot Cheever, having a bit more luck, but not much, in the Ligier, with last year's poleman Patrese way down in 18th. Roberto Guerrero made his race debut from 19th, and with the ATSs taking up the last row of the grid, Italians Teo Fabi and Riccardo Paletti would have to wait yet longer for their debuts. Many of the British teams were also glued to radios or televisions in their downtime, with the Falklands situation developing over the weekend. On Friday, Governor Rex Hunt officially surrendered the islands, the 57-man garrison not really having much chance against 500-plus Argentine commandos, and on Saturday the nearby islands of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands also fell. Those Argentine scrap metal workers who'd arrived and set up camp a couple of weeks earlier had in fact been Argentine Marines in disguise. An emergency session of the UN Security Council condemned the invasion, while on Saturday Prime Minister Thatcher announced to a hastily summoned House of Commons that a naval task force was being assembled and would sail on Monday. At least Chariots of Fire had won Best Picture at the Oscars just up the road in LA, so that was something. And so, amid all of this, it was time to go racing. Sunday was glorious, and the McLarens had looked on form in the morning warm-up with Lauda fastest by some margin. The 6 previous races at Long Beach had seen 6 different winners, of whom 3, Mario Andretti, 1978, Gilles Villeneuve, 79, and Nelson Piquet, 80, were on the grid today. They were all hoping to be the first man to win the US Grand Prix West twice, and everybody else was hoping to keep the streak going by winning themselves. There were no problems on the parade lap, and everyone lined up for the start, with the almost identical-looking Alfa Romeo and McLaren cars of de Cesaris and Lauda at the front. As they got away, Niki slithered a bit. He was running the harder compound of Michelin's and dropped behind Arnoux, while de Cesaris showed no nerves as he got away perfectly from his first pole start. Giacomelli had also got a great start in the other Alfa and was tucked up behind Lauda, with Prost now 6th sandwiched between the 2 Ferraris. De Cesaris began to pull out a lead from Arnoux relatively quickly, and it soon became clear that the Renault, unable to use its turbo power to greatest effect on the tight circuit, was holding up Lauda. Manfred Winkelhock was the first retiree, clouting the barriers and wiping off a wheel on lap 1, and he was joined a couple of laps later by his teammate Salazar, who did the same thing. ATS boss Günther Schmidt would not be a happy man. The De Cesaris continued to look like he belonged out front. Giacomelli closed up on the rear of Lauda, and a 3-car scrap developed, briefly, until the Italian made an ill-advised attempt to take both of them, only to slither into the back of the Renault and take both himself and the luckless Arnoux out, while Lauda continued serenely on his way. This promoted Villeneuve to third, with a two-way scrap between Rosberg and Watson over fourth and Piquet in sixth. Watson got past Rosberg just as Pironi became the latest victim of the hard walls. Lauda was closing on De Cesaris now and would be hoping that he could pressure the young Italian into a mistake. Watson, meanwhile, was on a charge and soon took third from Villeneuve, while championship leader Prost became the sixth driver in 10 laps to retire, again because of clipping a wall. By lap 15, De Cesaris was beginning to get among the backmarkers, and a moment being held up by Raoul Boesel's march was all Lauda needed to slingshot past and take the lead. He immediately began to pull away, and attention turned to the scrap between Villeneuve and Rosberg for fourth. Rosberg got past when Villeneuve made a slight mistake, only for Villeneuve to simply power back past him on the straight. The pair were going at it hammer and tongs and bearing down on Watson to boot. Eventually it was resolved when Villeneuve put a wheel on the marbles and slid wide. He kept it running and rejoined without too much fuss, but with Piquet now right on his tail. Rosberg meanwhile caught up to Watson and started attacking the McLaren. Rosberg's temporary teammate Andretti was out on lap 20, having deranged his suspension against a wall, while the Finn had a lucky escape himself, clipping a wall and wiping off his front wing left end plate. Piquet became another victim on lap 26, leaving just 17 still running, while Patrese at about the same time had a spin and knocked a front wing off. Rosberg finally got past Watson, as the track marshals struggled to get Piquet's car off the circuit, but had their recovery truck right on the racing line after a blind corner. Once they'd hooked the car up, the truck then drove round the circuit to take the nearest exit, forming a kind of mobile chicane on the way. 17 became 14 by lap 28 as Guerrero hit a wall, Lafitte spun and stalled, and, just for a bit of variety, Jarrier's transmission packed up. The newer parts of the circuit were beginning to break up, and some drivers were finding their tyres going off on the abrasive surface. Watson had spun on his worn Michelins and flat-spotted them, so came in for new boots on lap 29. Andrea De Cesaris had meanwhile been confounding a lot of expectations by driving a sensible, mature race in second place until something cracked on his rear suspension on lap 34 and he slewed heavily into a wall, demolishing his car. So Rosberg was promoted to second, with Villeneuve third and Alboreto going great guns in the Tyrrell, bearing down on the Ferrari. Chiva had made his way up to fifth in the Ligier, and De Angelis, a lap down, was sixth in the Lotus, with a one-winged Patrese on his tail. It was a good fight, and after some ducking and weaving, the Brabham driver got through to get up into the points. Chiva was lapped and went in for new tyres in a distinctly leisurely-looking stop by the Ligier team, rejoining 8th and promoting Patrese and De Angelis. Alboreto was beginning to drop back from Villeneuve too, and a three-way battle of the Italians looked like it might be on the cards. There were just 11 cars left running at two-thirds distance, with 3 teams, McLaren, Lotus and Tyrrell, still having both cars running. Rosberg was slowly chipping away at Lauda's lead, but it was a fairly hefty one, and it didn't look like the Austrian veteran was in much danger unless he had a technical problem or made a mistake. Patrese had got up to 4th ahead of Alboreto, while De Angelis had a lucky escape when Watson bore down on him, only to slide wide on the marbles. Alboreto was still trying to retake 4th, and he and Patrese were going so quickly they unlapped themselves from a cruising Niki Lauda, who moved over to let them through. With 10 laps to go, Lauda's lead was still over 20 seconds, and he cruised serenely to his 18th career win, which he took with 15 seconds advantage over Keke Rosberg, runner-up for the second race in succession, and thus taking the lead in the championship standings. Gilles Villeneuve was third, finishing for the first time in 1982, with the Italian trio of Patrese, Alboreto and De Angelis taking up the remaining points positions. After the race, Ken Tyrrell protested the Ferrari rear wing, and this, like Renault's protest over the water-cooled brakes in Brazil, would be decided by the FIA in the 3 weeks before the teams moved to Europe for the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola. But for now, Niki Lauda seemed to have proved wrong any who questioned his motivation or his ability to make a successful comeback with a dominant drive on just his 3rd race back.